Welcome back to another Random Gleanings. He is Chris. I am Jesse. And Chris, today we are in the week of the start of the rate cutting cycle. And so we thought we'd address rates and have a little bit of a discussion as to maybe the unintended consequences of the rate cutting cycle.
Yeah, so today's September 17th, and tomorrow we know we get the first rate cut from the Fed. And so rate cuts, right? Maybe refinancing a mortgage, or not so fast. I mean, that's the question. So let's set the scene for kind of how we got to this point.
Sure.
2 years ago, everyone believed we were going to have a recession.
Yep.
And it didn't happen. Okay.
I think the Fed themselves were saying, prepare for pain.
Right.
And so in their effort to squash inflation, they were going to raise the rate, and the anticipation was the recession was going to put an end to inflation, and we have not yet seen that.
So let's set the stage. At the end of 2022, 66% of American households owned their home. Okay. And what's interesting to me is if you look today, now this is a year later, but if you look today, the share of U.S. homeowners that are mortgage-free are nearly 40%.
Yep.
Okay, so 40% of 66% is 26%. So what that means is just a little bit over 1 in 4 American households are mortgage-free.
No debt
on their property.
No debt on their property, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
So they paid that booger off. Now, I'm sure some of those households paid those houses off in the last, call it 10 or 15 years, right?
Yep.
Well, 10 or 15 years ago, rates were zero.
Yeah, we get asked all the time, should I just pay off my mortgage? Well, if your mortgage was 5.5 or 6, go ahead and plow it away.
But if your mortgage is 4,
especially
or 3.5,
when cash was paying 0, we're in a different world right now.
Correct.
Right?
That's right. So let's look at this next chart. So this is a chart that basically, the punchline of this chart is, look, cash balances going back all the way to the 1950s are effectively at all-time highs in U.S. households. That's just the bottom line. Households have been flush with cash. So if 1 in 4 aren't paying mortgages, well, guess what they're doing with their cash? They're probably saving it and probably earning 5+% on it. At least they have been for the last year or two.
Yep. I think July 26th of last year was the last rate increase, which brought us, just over a year.
Yeah. So take a look at the next chart. This is corporate balance sheets. You'll see that corporations have the most cash on their balance sheets since the 1950s. So, I mean, they're in pretty doggone good shape as well. Cash means more potential for activity in the economy, right?
Or stability, or all those things that are backing them up,
right?
And certainly it means that they have not been subject to the risk of the raised federal fund rate.
Yeah. In fact, let's look at the next chart, which deals with household debt. What you will find is that the blue line is basically variable rate debt. What you'll find is we're in the bottom half of variable rate debt in terms of what households have going back to the 1950s. In fact, the only time that was lower was down around the Great Recession in terms of variable rate debt. So, it's not as if debt has increased exponentially, or at least the variable rate kind that costs a bunch of money and really sort of drowns or constricts the households from doing stuff.
Well, again, variable rate would have risen dramatically.
Right.
If someone was exposed to that, they would have been punished in this rate hiking cycle and maybe looking for relief in this, but that's just not been the case over the last number of years.
Right. And again, same thing for corporations. Corporations are among the certainly the lower half of what their variable rate debt has been. So the bottom line is, okay, households and corporations both have more cash.
Yep.
Okay. They're on the lower end of variable rate debt, which means this really hasn't impacted them negatively. But here's what's really, really, really interesting. Go to the next chart. And what you see is the 5.25% that people have been getting on 90-day treasuries. The market, so this is a chart of Fed funds futures, and you've got two different things. On the y-axis, the vertical axis, you've got dates. going from September 18th, that's tomorrow, all the way out until a year from now. And then over on going across the top, what you've got is where the market expects interest rates to be. So right now it's 5.25 to 5.5 on September 17th. The expectation at 63% when we pulled this chart was that we're going to get a 50 basis point cut tomorrow, a 0.5%.
Yep.
Okay. Now there's a 37% chance that it's 0.25%. Fine. Let's focus more on the end of the year. The market thinks that we're going to be 1 to 1.25% lower by Christmas this year. Okay. So, and I'll also draw your attention down here to June 18th of 2025. Right now, the market thinks that we're going to be at 3%, which is 2.25% lower than where we are right now by June of next year. Okay.
Okay.
So what if the economy is too good and that's too optimistic because the Fed is worried about inflation kind of being pesky?
Right,
I'm not
right.
talking about 9%
Not getting
inflation.
back, right.
Yeah, talking about, 3s and 4s. So here's our friend, next chart, Darius Dale. The blue line is just his math on what he thinks could happen to inflation. Could see inflation at least be a little modestly pesky and kind of hang in there, right? Hang in there enough to where the Fed can't hang a mission accomplished banner.
Yep. Or just bring things down at the pace that the last chart showed us, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So what if the Fed gets down to 4 to 4.25 like the market expects by Christmas? Okay. Which is not terribly unreasonable. Okay. But then they kind of have to pause. Where should 10-year treasuries trade? And what is tied to 10-year treasuries?
Well, I know we've run kind of the numbers before of the 90-day Treasury and the spread on the 10-year. The average is just above 1%. I think 1.1-ish%.
Yep,
right?
on this next chart in black here.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. And so, if what your question is, if the 90-day or the 3-month Treasury or Fed funds rate is down to 4, you would expect that the 10-year should be somewhere north of 5.
Yeah, you would. And currently, going back one chart yet again, currently it's at 3.66% as of September 17th. So it's still upside down.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So, and by the way, on this black chart here, I will point out, this is going back to 1960, the average that the 10-year trades above the 3-month Treasury is 1.12. Okay. There have been plenty of times it's a lot higher than that. Okay. Not saying that's going to happen, but what would happen if we got down to 4 to 4.25 and the economy was relatively good and inflation was modestly pesky, which really wouldn't be that much of a surprise. I mean, when we've seen wholesale producer price index numbers kind of be modestly pesky, when we've seen industrial numbers, industrial production numbers being way better than expected. I mean, it wouldn't be surprising to see things a little better than expected.
Yeah, and I think a little better than expected is maybe set on a baseline of the last number of years where inflation almost was non-existent, right? So
Right.
a 2.5 to 3%. We're as of August, I think CPI came in at 2.5. If we just hung out in this 2.5 to 3% range, that would be pesky, right?
It would, but I mean, if you got into the low 3s, it would still be.
That's even a little more pesky. But
Yeah.
I think what we're saying is maybe the expectation is things get back to sub 2% inflation.
The expectation is that doesn't, Darius's point in that chart, but the blue line was
Right.
actually it starts to creep back up into the 3s.
Understood.
So if that happens, though, what happens to the 10-year? So look at this chart of mortgage rates. This is a 30-year mortgage rate in purple and the 10-year Treasury, which is in orange. What you'll see is it's usually about 2.5 to 3% difference, but that 30-year mortgage is pretty well tied to that 10-year. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a pretty consistent spread there between the two of them. And so what I'm hearing you're saying is, Fed funds rate has to pause. at
Right.
some point, maybe.
If the economy's
if the economy
decent.
stays strong.
Yep.
And that means that for a normal yield curve, the 10-year needs to be higher than it is right now.
5.1, something
And
like
so
that.
to your point, do we get a refinancing opportunity or refinancing boom in an environment where the 10-year may creep higher?
I mean, the answer to that question would be no. It would be no. I mean, if it's at 3.66 and, it uninverts and Fed funds settles at 4.25, somewhere in there, and you've got what should be around a 1% premium to that, well, that would be 5.25, which would mean then that rates would be rising, 1.5%, which means then that mortgage rates would go to 7.5, 7.75 again, somewhere. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm saying that it's not a stretch to say that if the yield curve gets around to uninverting, unless we have a recession, bonds
or maybe
may be
more directly, the front end of the curve, which is what the Fed controls.
Yep.
A cut there does not equate necessarily to a cut on
It does
mortgage
not.
rates.
It does not equal lower mortgage rates.
Right.
That's right. And right now, you've got an upside down 10-year relative to all this other stuff, and with inflation estimates where they are, it kind of at least begs the question: are bonds maybe a little too optimistic about inflation at this point?
Yep.
And that's really the big question. And listen, that may sound inside baseball, but here's the thing: if rates rise, last summer, from call it June, July of 2023 until October of 2023, rates went from 4% to 5%. Stocks were positive on the year by a pretty decent number, and you saw about a 12% pullback in stocks, which, of course, admittedly, is not that terrible. Okay, but nobody wants to go 12% backwards on their stock portfolio.
Right.
Okay, so if you're looking at this, if well, what do rates have to do? Rising rates on the longer end have
Or
to
you're
do
saying
with stocks.
I do own my house, or I've got a locked-in mortgage, so I'm not concerned about that. Well, there are ramifications that rates have on other aspects of the economy.
Right. That's exactly right. So, we could all be thinking first order, hey, rates lowering, good. That means I can refinance my mortgage. Not so fast, my friend. Because it's tied to the 10-year. What happens if the 10-year, because the economy's good, starts to uninvert? Where does it go? Like, it doesn't look to me personally like it's going massively lower from right here, unless we have a recession.
Right.
So that's really the big question.
Well, we'll close this out with just a quick look at where S&P returns have been after rate cuts start. And I think maybe most pressing to this conversation is, if we look at this chart, it is in the first 3 months after the rate cut that there are some risks, because the average is actually 3 months later, the market is lower. 6 months and 12 months out, things are okay. They're underperforming, I guess, to the average of the S&P over the long term, and there's a pretty wide range as to the outcomes a year out, but they are positive. And so this is not a let's get bearish, but there are some things that may be surprising coming after this week's rate cut.
Yep.
Anything you're watching right now?
Man, I'm still trying to finish Suits. I was sharing with you earlier, one of the things I love about Suits is movie lines always come out, and I was trying to think of an appropriate movie line for this conversation. But 8 seasons. We're in season 8. There are 9 seasons, 16 episodes in season 8. It's killing me, man. I'm ready to I'm ready to watch season 2 of Stallone's show on Paramount. The Tulsa King.
Yeah, there you go. Couldn't think of it.
And I can't seem to get there. And the wife wants to watch Emily in Paris, which is tolerable. And actually, trivia. The main character, Emily, is Phil Collins' daughter.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Who knew?
Yeah. So what are you watching?
Angie and I just started watching on Hulu an FX program called The Old Man.
Nice.
Jeff Bridges and John Lithgow.
Very nice.
I didn't really know what to expect, but Jeff Bridges, who I think of as the Big Lebowski, is anything but the stoner type in the Big Lebowski. He's kind of ex-CIA agent type guy.
Oh, wow.
And a very bad character. Like, I'm not sure if he's a bad guy yet.
Bad good or
but
bad
bad. Like
you just don't want to mess with him.
Don't want to mess with him. There you go.
How about Lithgow? What's his character like?
He is. They are tied, and it's uncertain yet. I'm in season 1. Season 2 apparently has just recently come out, which is what got me interested. But there's some history between these two characters, and it's not clearly defined as to what all it entails. So,
Got it.
But it's really, really good.
I hear Lithgow and think of Third Rock from the Sun.
Right.
So anyway.
Yeah.
All right, friends, as always, thank you for watching. We're grateful. Thanks for listening to our banter. We are appreciative. Please do subscribe. Please click the bell to be notified when we post. We'll talk to y'all soon.